She was a billionaire who mocked everyone at her gala. She promised to marry any man who could play her piano. With true genius, the rich failed one by one. But when the black janitor sat at the keys, the room fell silent, and the music changed everything. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and golden walls as the elite of the city gathered for a charity gala. The air smelled of perfume mixed with wine, and the sound of laughter echoed across the marble floors. In the center of the hall stood a grand piano, polished until it shone like a mirror. Many admired it, but none dared to touch it, for it belonged to the famous billionaire Evelyn Hart. Evelyn was known not only for her wealth, but also for her pride. She loved games that proved her power and status. That night, she stood tall in her sparkling gown, surrounded by admirers, and she pointed toward the piano with a sly smile. She announced, "If anyone here can play this piano with true mastery, I will marry him." Her words caused the crowd to burst into laughter and whisper. Some thought she was joking, some thought she was serious, yet all knew that Evelyn enjoyed mocking those she saw as beneath her. Several wealthy young men stepped forward, trying to impress her one by one. They sat at the piano. They struck keys, awkwardly producing clumsy notes. The music was broken, the rhythm lost. Each time, Evelyn laughed louder, waving them away. "None of you are worthy," she declared, raising her glass as if she had won a battle. Among the guests, hidden in the background, stood a man in a simple uniform. His name was David. He worked at the gala as a janitor, sweeping floors and clearing empty glasses. His skin was dark, his clothes plain, and most of the guests ignored him as if he were invisible. Yet David had a secret. A lifetime ago, he had touched the piano for the first time in a small church, and the keys had become his language. Music was his soul, though poverty had stolen his chance to shine. As Evelyn continued mocking the failed performers, David felt his heart ache. The piano called to him with silent power. Each note that the rich men stumbled over rang inside his mind with perfect clarity. He knew how the melody should sound, how the rhythm should flow, but he kept silent for fear of ridicule. Then Evelyn noticed him standing nearby. She smirked and said, "Look, even the janitor is staring at my piano. Do you think you could do better?" She spoke with sharp cruelty. The guests laughed loudly, pointing at David as if the idea were absurd. David lowered his gaze, but something inside him stirred. Courage pushed against his fear, and his voice came quiet, yet steady. "I can play." The laughter grew harsher. Evelyn raised her brows and clapped her hands in mock delight. "Then come," she said. "If you can play this piano with true genius, I will keep my promise and marry you." She spoke as if the challenge were impossible. The crowd roared with amusement, ready to watch another humiliation. David walked slowly to the piano. His hands shook not from lack of skill, but from the weight of every eye upon him. He sat down on the bench and placed his fingers on the keys. The room fell into silence. Some waited for a disaster, others waited for a miracle. The ballroom grew silent as David sat before the piano. The laughter that had filled the air moments ago now faded into whispers and shuffles of chairs. His rough hands rested lightly on the keys. They were hands that had scrubbed floors and carried heavy buckets, yet when they touched the piano, they moved with surprising grace. Evelyn leaned against the golden railing near the stage, her lips curled in mock amusement. She crossed her arms, waiting for him to stumble and fail. The wealthy guests leaned closer, some with phones ready to record the humiliation, all eyes fixed on the janitor who dared to sit at the instrument of the elite. David closed his eyes for a moment. In his mind, he saw the small church where he had first played as a child. He remembered the old priest who had shown him a simple hymn. He remembered nights when hunger filled his stomach, but music filled his spirit. He remembered the promise he had made to himself that no matter what life took from him, it would never take away the music. Then his fingers pressed the first note. A single sound filled the hall, clear, strong, and alive. It carried through the air like a bell, breaking the heavy silence. The guests stopped breathing. For an instant, Evelyn raised her eyebrows, but she still smirked, as if waiting for the mistake that would surely come. Yet the mistake never came. David's hands began to move with speed and precision. The melody rose like a river flowing over stones, smooth and endless. Each key seemed to sing a story of pain and hope, of struggle and triumph. His music was not only technical, it was filled with emotion that reached every corner of the grand hall. The crowd gasped softly, some clutched their hearts, others leaned forward in awe. Their laughter was gone, replaced by wonder. The janitor was not fumbling like the rich young man before him. He was creating magic. Evelyn's smile slowly faded. She had expected a fool, but what she saw was mastery. The notes danced around her, striking her heart in ways she had not felt in years. She tried to maintain her pride, but her fingers tightened on her wine glass, and her chest rose and fell faster than before. David continued to play as if the piano were an extension of his soul. His body swayed with the rhythm, his eyes closed as he poured his life into every note. The music built higher and higher, then softened into whispers of sound that touched the very edges of silence. The grand chandelier seemed to shimmer brighter, as though it too felt the music. By the time he struck the final chord, the room was trembling with emotion. The sound lingered like a prayer hanging in the air. Then silence returned, but it was not the silence of mockery. It was the silence of reverence. The guests stared wide-eyed at the man they had once ignored. Their faces reflected disbelief and admiration. David opened his eyes slowly. He lifted his hands from the keys and folded them on his lap. He did not smile. He did not bow. He simply sat with calm dignity. The room erupted into applause that thundered off the marble walls. People rose to their feet, shouting, cheering, clapping. Evelyn stood frozen, her challenge now twisted into something she had never expected. The applause roared like a storm, filling every corner of the ballroom. Guests who had once mocked David now shouted his praise. Some even wiped tears from their eyes, for the music had touched them in places money could never reach. The chandeliers shook with the thunder of hands clapping and feet stamping. Evelyn, however, stood frozen, unable to join the celebration. Her lips parted as if to speak, yet no sound came. The smirk she had worn so proudly earlier had vanished, replaced by disbelief. Her challenge had been a cruel joke, but now it had become a promise that threatened her pride. She had declared that she would marry the man who could play with true genius, and David had done far more than that. He had reminded everyone in the room what music really meant. David slowly stood from the piano. His simple uniform looked out of place in the grand hall, yet the dignity in his posture outshone the diamonds and silks around him. He bowed his head slightly in respect to the cheering crowd, but he did not raise his arms to seek glory. For him, the performance was not about fame or victory. It was about truth. It was about proving that talent and spirit could not be buried by poverty. The billionaire guests whispered among themselves. Some spoke of how they had never heard such skill, even from professional musicians. Others wondered how a janitor had mastered the piano so completely. The truth spread quickly that David had taught himself with nothing but passion and persistence. No tutors, no expensive schools, just raw devotion. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She felt anger, embarrassment, and something else she could not name. The music still echoed inside her, stirring feelings she had locked away long ago, memories of her childhood, when she too had loved the piano before wealth and pride had hardened her soul. She remembered a time when music had meant joy, not competition, but she pushed those thoughts aside and clung to her pride. She raised her hand for silence. The crowd slowly quieted, waiting for her response. Her voice shook slightly as she said, "Well, you played better than I expected, but a deal is a deal, is it not? I said, if you can play this piano with true genius, I would marry you." The crowd gasped again, turning to see what would happen. David looked at her calmly. His deep voice rang out steady and humble. "I did not play for marriage. I did not play for your challenge. I played because music is who I am. It is my breath. It is my life. If my music touched your heart, then let it teach you that worth is not measured by wealth or status." The guests murmured at his words. Some clapped again, moved by his humility. Evelyn's face burned red. She had been exposed not only for her mockery, but for the emptiness of her pride. David had turned her game into a lesson, and the crowd admired him even more for it. Still, the weight of her promise hung heavy in the air. Would Evelyn swallow her pride and honor her word, or would she twist her way out of it before the eyes of the city elite? The ballroom filled again with whispers as Evelyn stood before the crowd. Her gown sparkled under the chandelier, but her pride felt heavier than the jewels she wore. She had spoken boldly before everyone, declaring a challenge she thought no man could win, yet now the janitor had played with a genius that none could deny, and her words had turned into a chain around her own neck. David remained calm at the piano bench's head, was bowed slightly, his hands resting gently on his lap. He looked neither proud nor nervous. He simply waited. His silence carried more power than anger could have done. The guests watched closely, sensing that history was being made before their eyes. Evelyn finally raised her chin and forced a smile. Her voice carried across the room with effort. "I am a woman of my word," she said. "If I make a promise, I will keep it. I declare that I would marry the man who could master my piano. And here, he is the janitor who has stolen the night with his music." The crowd gasped again. Some clapped, some shouted encouragement, others laughed in disbelief. Could it be possible that the most powerful woman in the city would tie her future to a man who scrubbed floors? The contrast was almost too great to imagine. David slowly stood to his full height. He looked at Evelyn with steady eyes. His words came soft but clear. "I do not need marriage to prove my worth. I am not here to claim you as a prize. I am here to show that true music does not belong to wealth or pride. It belongs to the heart. If you would honor your word, then honor the music, not me." The guests murmured once more. Some whispered that David was wise beyond measure. Some said he was a fool to reject such an opportunity. Evelyn, however, felt her pride tremble. She had expected him to beg or rejoice. Instead, he had lifted himself above her game and turned her challenge into a lesson. She could not control him. He had become greater than her mockery. Her voice shook again, but this time with something like respect. "You speak with wisdom, janitor. You play with fire and soul. I cannot deny it. You're greater than I thought, and perhaps greater than all of us here." The crowd erupted into applause again, louder than before. They stood to their feet, shouting his name. Janitor, no janitor, musician, genius. The words echoed across the golden walls. David lowered his eyes once more and whispered, "Thank you. That is enough for me." Yet Evelyn was not finished. She stepped closer, her face softer now. "I mocked you tonight. I saw only your uniform and not your spirit. For that, I am ashamed. I offered marriage as a joke, but now I see that you're the only man here who holds real strength, not in wealth, not in status, but in heart." Her words shook the guests as much as the music had the room filled with silence again. As everyone waited to see what would happen next, the silence in the ballroom felt heavy. As Evelyn stood close to David, her proud posture seemed softer now. Her voice, less sharp, her words of mockery had turned into words of respect, and yet the weight of her promise still lingered on the golden floor. The crowd leaned forward, desperate to know how this night would end. David looked around at the faces staring back at him. Some showed awe, some showed shame, some showed hope. He took a deep breath and spoke with calm strength. "I am honored by your words, but I did not play for glory or for marriage. I played because music is the soul that binds us all. Rich or poor, strong or weak, music is truth, and truth cannot be mocked." His voice echoed across the hall, and many nodded in agreement. Some of the guests even wiped tears again. Evelyn lowered her eyes, struggling with the fire of humility that she had never known before. For years, she had ruled with wealth and pride. Yet tonight a janitor had defeated her, not with power, but with music. She raised her head once more and said, "Then let us honor the truth. If I cannot give you my hand as a wife, then I will give you my hand as a partner. From this day, you will never again be the janitor of this place. You will be the master of music in my halls. Every event, every gala, every gathering will hear your genius, and I will pay you not with pity, but with respect." The crowd exploded into cheers. The chandeliers shook again from the sound. The applause was not for Evelyn this time. It was for David, the man who had risen from the shadows of poverty to the light of greatness, without begging, without bowing, without pride, but with pure heart. David bowed his head, but his eyes shone with quiet fire. He accepted not for wealth, but for the chance to share his gift with the world. He said, "If you truly honor music, then let this hall be filled with it. Let every child who has no teacher and no stage come here to learn. Let this piano not belong to one, but to all." The guests gasped at his boldness. Evelyn stood stunned, but then slowly nodded yes. She whispered, "Yes, it shall be." So her voice trembled, but her spirit had been touched more deeply than she wished to admit. She extended her hand, and David shook it firmly. The night ended with the sound of music, not from wealth, not from pride, but from truth. David played once more, and this time the guests did not watch with mockery. They closed their eyes and let the music carry them beyond the walls of gold into the world of dreams and hope. The janitor had become a master. The mocked had become the teacher. The piano that once symbolized pride now sang with freedom, and the promise of marriage, though spoken as a cruel joke, had been transformed into a promise far greater, a promise of respect, of opportunity, and of the power of genius born from the heart. And so the story of that night lived on, not as the tale of a billionaire mocking her guests, but as the legend of a janitor who played like a genius and changed the meaning of music forever.